We believe, and our oral tradition states, that we came here prior to slavery. We came here around the 1300s. That came with Abubakar. He was the prince in Africa and Mali who abdicated his throne so he could become a seafarer. He said, you know what, you guys could conquer the land and I'm going to conquer the ocean. So along with over 1,000 ships, on his first expedition, he took 100 ships and only 2 returned back to Africa, to Mali.
Mali, that would be Africa.
Cheryl Noralez here. Garifuna. Good afternoon, my name is Cheryl Noralez. I am Garifuna and I'm very proud. Thank you first of all, Arturo, for having us here, for inviting us into this space to talk about our culture. So today we're going to talk about the historical narrative of the indigenous Caribbean people, also known throughout history as the Kalinagu. That's what they call themselves, their indigenous name. Carib is what the European gave them. But our name for ourselves is Kalina, the original indigenous name, and the name that we made in Central America and throughout the diaspora is Garifuna. The indigenous land is Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, which is in the Lesser Antilles. And that is our original homeland. So I'm going to take you to a little journey of where we began and where we are today. Of course, you know the evidence of Black people here in the Americas is well documented. But oftentimes when it comes to American history, we're often related to just basically the only way we got here is through slavery. But from our oral history and from the oral history in our homeland of Saint Vincent, we believe, and our oral tradition states, that we came here prior to slavery. We came here around the 1300s. That came with Abubakar. He was the prince in Africa and Mali who abdicated his throne so he could become a seafarer. He said, you know what, you guys could conquer the land and I'm going to conquer the ocean. So along with over 1,000 ships, on his first expedition, he took 100 ships and only 2 returned back to Africa, to Mali. So on his next voyage, he had 2,000 ships, and the 2,000 trip made it all the way over here. You have to think about what happens when you leave from Africa in different parts of Africa. The natural wave will automatically bring you over here to the American continent. So that's what happened along the whole Lesser Antilles, that all of these different trips that came from Africa landed over here. There are 2 currents, the Garinagu and the Canary, that originates on the coast of Africa and flow west to the Americas. So that's what pretty much happened with that voyage. The Mandinka people of Mali Empire made voyages to America in 1310 and also in 1311. The first expedition left with 200 ships of men and 200 ships of trade material, food and water. On the first journey, only 1 ship returned. The second expedition left with 1,000 ships with men and 1,000 ships with supplies. The journey of Abubakar is also documented within the University of Timbuktu. This is a picture of Abubakar, and he was the one that led. He is what we consider, from the people of Saint Vincent, he is what we consider one of our founding fathers. In their indigenous language, they call the land Herun, which means the land of the blessed. Now that is in the Kalina language, and that's what they refer to their land. We call it here Saint Vincent and the Grenadines. That's what the Europeans have named it, but for our indigenous people, we call it Herun. In the Garifuna language, we call it Yurme, which means homeland. That is our homeland. So you'll hear me kind of use that word interchangeably. You'll hear me say Saint Vincent, or you'll hear me say Yurme. But it's pretty much the same thing. One is just in American words and then one is in our language. By the way, our language is Garifuna, the same language that we speak is the same language that we are as people. I speak Garifuna, I am Garifuna, and we have a whole culture, we have our own spiritual belief. And the one thing about us who are exiled maintain that culture. We maintain the language, we maintain our spiritual belief, and we maintain our identity. Came from Africa, and I'm going to emphasize that, arrived with ships of men and took native women as wives. Through the nation, the Garifuna race was born. Why is that important? Because when you read about the Garifuna people, the first thing you will always hear is that shipwreck story of 1635. The only way that we came here is because we came here from shipwreck story. But again, that's not the story that we believe. And I continue to do, presentations like this to kind of let you know what our history is from our mouth, like Arturo said, to learn from us, the people. Throughout the time that we were in Saint Vincent, we lived with the Europeans for centuries. We had multiple battles with them. We had multiple wars with them. And during that time, they started to incorporate 2 groups of people. They incorporated the slaves or whatnot in the Caribbean, and it also, brought in what you call the indentured servants, who were from the East Indies, the Indian people. So you have those two populations there living with the indigenous people of Garifuna. And throughout this whole time, prior to the Europeans coining us as Black Caribs, we were always recognized as one people, as just Carib, as alien Caribs. Whether we were in the lesser or greater Antilles, the whole Caribbean basically marked our territory. So the reason that they named that area after us, Caribbean, is that was all of our territory. All the way from the lesser Antilles, which are the smaller islands, and all the way to the greater Antilles, which are the bigger islands of Cuba and Hispaniola, Borica, and all those kind of places. One of my heroes, Roatan, he was a Taino Arawak from Borica, from Washington, Puerto Rico. He stated, because of course when you read the history, they'll always say that the Garifuna people were vicious, that we killed other natives and we took their wives, we killed everybody, that we were just conquering everything. But that was like the propaganda that was spread out there. You know, they were afraid of us because when you come into our land and you invade, the natural thing that anybody's going to do is fight back. So when we had these people that came into our land and they started to invade our country, we automatically just fought back. And because we weren't docile, because we didn't give in, we were known to be vicious because we really, really fought for our land. Again, over the span of 150 years, we fought with both the British Empire and we fought with the French. So according to Taino historian Roatan, his name is mighty one in this language, he states that the Taino and Arawak, the Kalinagu, welcomed the travelers from Africa. We took them in as brothers. He stated that the Africans and natives did not kill each other off the false statement by the white man. Roatan stated, those are the lies that the white men spread to tear us apart from our brothers. And those are the things that you'll continue to hear throughout our history. Once we started to reconnect with our Taino brothers, our Kalinagu brothers, we pretty much had the same stories. As a matter of fact, the first time we encountered our Taino brothers and our Kalinagu brothers was in 2005. We had the first Garifuna Forum in Los Angeles, and we invited them. And what was surprising to them, and what was surprising to us, is that we were still alive. Because when we were exiled in 1797, they told them that we died. So according to them, they believed that we did not exist anymore. They thought that the people, the original people who were exiled, they thought that we died. And as far as we were concerned in Central America, those of us who went to Central America, we didn't know they still existed. So in 2005 was the first time that we all came together and we started to share our story about the history that happened in the island and the history what happened to the people who were exiled. The picture over here is the picture of our last chief. His name is Chief Joseph Chartier. And according to our oral history, he had 5 wives. Back then, men were able to take as many wives as they could afford. You know, so he had 5 wives. His main wife her name was Boruta. You'll hear about her a little bit later. And over here, this is a picture of the different leaders of the different Carib tribes signing treaties with the Europeans. Now, I'm going to go back again. One of the stories that they always say about Garifuna people is that we were escaped slaves. I don't know any place in history where Europeans, at that time, the most mightiest power in the world, signed treaties with slaves. Anybody ever heard that before? No, right? You know, so there's no way that they would be signing a treaty with slaves. The British Empire initiated and signed 3 major treaties with the indigenous people in Saint Vincent. However, the British people violated every single treaty that they signed with us. Every single treaty. We had one treaty that we divided the land, where we were willing to, you know, split the land with them. This land was Garifuna land. Of course, this land was all of their land. You know, and we agreed to it. Okay, we'll take this smaller portion of land. But what happened? When they returned back, or when they sent their people back to Europe, the little bit of land that they left for us, they would go back to England and resell the land. So instead of having this little bit of land that they allotted us, they decided was ours on our own land, they went back to Europe. Not only did they sell that portion of land which they agreed to with the treaty was our land, they also sold all these people in this row with them. So when they came back, when you have over there, they're called the planters. Here we call them colonizers. But over there, the planters would come back. Over here, this is your new land, and everybody who lives on this land belongs to you. So we didn't, you know, we didn't agree to that. That wasn't the agreement that we had with them. The agreement that we had with them is, we'll share this land with you. You stay here, and we'll stay here. So what happened is they would, inch by inch, continue to move in on our territory, continue to break into the lands that we agreed upon. And of course, what did we do? We fought. We continued to have multiple skirmishes throughout the years because they kept inching us away from our land. Every time they came back, every time we had a new government of Saint Vincent that was assigned by the Europeans, they allotted their land to themselves. So while we were trying to live in peace, they continued to take our land. And we did not stand for that. And again, we continue to fight for our indigenous land rights. So when you talk about all of the different wars that happened in Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, it was basically the same thing that's happening now. Indigenous land rights. Indigenous land rights was what we were fighting for. They wanted our land, which was very rich soil, volcanic land. They wanted our land to produce sugarcane plantations, which they eventually did. But that was the reason that they wanted our land for. And they fought us to the militaries, and we fought them right back. We have updated research, because right now, if you look at Garifuna History Research, you'll have books out there all the way dating back to 1661, 1635, which was pretty much the account of the Europeans, the French, the British, all of those people that basically didn't want us. So they're a little bit biased about the history that they write about us. I sat in a lecture last week from a class that was in England. Believe it or not, they have courses about Garifuna people throughout Europe. They've been having that for years. I'm gonna kind of tell you a little story. The first time I got a call from a student from Germany, she was taking a Garifuna history class in Germany about us. So she found me online and she calls me, "Are you a real life Garifuna? Are you guys still alive?" And I'm like, yeah. And she was like, "They told us you were dead. We thought you were like a myth, a make-believe. Are you guys really still alive?" And I was like, yes. So I'm speaking to a real life Garifuna. Yes. So we started this great relationship for over 8 years. She completed her dissertation and everything. She came from Germany. She met with the Garifuna community in New York. And, she just couldn't believe that we still exist. Because even in the European history book, they basically wrote us off as dead. Wow. But you have to understand why they assumed that we were dead. Because over the years of battles with the Europeans, after so many years of battle, they got tired of us. And again, their main thing was they wanted that land. So what can they do to get their land? You're no longer indigenous. Now, they went from calling us Caribs, mind you, everybody was labeled Caribs, to calling us, those who continue to fight them, Black Caribs. So by them calling us Black Caribs, we are no longer considered indigenous to Saint Vincent. We are now considered indigenous to Africa. We are now escaped slaves. We are now everything that didn't have rights to that land. And in the archives, it's documented. The first person who started to use the word Black Carib was Sir William Young II in 1635. Prior to that, when you look through all the books, you'll just see Caribs. Caribs here in the Lesser Antilles, Caribs in the Lower Antilles, and so forth, Greater and Lesser Antilles. But you will not see the term Black Carib until 1635. What happened in 1635? So, the British monarch back then, they commissioned Sir Young to do a survey of the lands that were still available. Because they just had it with us. Like, we're tired of fighting with these people. We just want them off the land. We need to do the plantations. We need to we need to do what we need to do. So they commissioned Mr. Young, I won't call him sir. They commissioned him to do a survey of the land. How many people were indigenous? How many lands do we have? What can we do? When can we start this planning process? So when they commissioned that, Sir Young intentionally inserted the word Caribs, Black Caribs. And he justified taking our land away from us. And then he justified that, keeping in mind, when he justified that, he had to create a story. So according to archives, he was the first person who ever initiated that 1635 shipwreck story. Because throughout the archives, the French and the English archive, there are no documented shipwrecks. along the Lesser Antilles during that time. None. How do we know that? Because the British and the French documented everything. How do we know that? Because every ship, slave ship that came from Europe was insured. I'm talking about the slave people were commodity, they were cargoes. So if a ship got sunk, they were gonna get insured. They were gonna get paid by every single slave that was on that ship. So, trust me, if there was any shipwreck during that time, somebody would have claimed it, because that's lost money. And throughout all of the archives that we've done, different researchers, in the French and British archives, there's no records of a shipwreck happening in 1635. But when that was proven wrong, Mr. Young, he changed it to, well, no, maybe it wasn't 1635, maybe it was 1667. No, maybe it wasn't 1667, maybe it was 1670, 1665. So they changed it throughout the year. But all of those shipwrecks that they say happened, again, the archives, there's no reported archives in that particular area until 1685. That happened on a ship. I can't remember the name of the ship, but it happened on a ship. They were heading toward Jamaica. And they reported the number of slaves that were on that ship, and everybody died. That's the only record of a ship that happened during that time. 1681. 1681. But again, to justify that we were not indigenous to that land, and to justify that we did not have rights to that land, even though the powers that be knew the truth, they widely accepted that story. And at that time, who wrote the history? So they wrote that history, the propaganda. The story began that Garifuna people stopped basically being indigenous all of a sudden, and now we're these escaped slaves. They had the justification that they needed to charge us with treason for daring to lift multiple hands against the British crown. And the charge for treason against the British monarchy back then, and I think still now, is death. So, what happened to us? After a year of fighting, our chiefs died within the first 5 years of the last Carib War. We had 3 major Carib Wars with the British. We had the first Carib War, the second Carib War, and the last Carib War is where you'll hear them talk about our chief, Joseph Chatier. Within the first 5 days of the war, he was killed. Now, we have different versions of how he died, but he was basically assassinated with a knife to his back. But again, that's what we know that happened. The stories that you'll hear out there, he thought that he had the power, he was invisible, he was a superhero, and he dared to challenge, the army general, because he felt that he would not die. That's the story that they wrote. And so he basically confronted, according to their oral history, their written history, he basically confronted one of the best swordsmen in all of England, the #1 swordsman, to a duel. And that's how he died. But the evidence and what we know happened, and how we know it happened, because the people that were there wrote about what happened. They shared the story, oral history of what happened. And usually when our Garifuna leaders are dead, like in the U.S. military now, no man is left behind. We take our dead and we bury them, especially our leaders. But, of course, what did they do to our chief? They took his body and hid it from us. And for the longest time, we didn't know where his body lay. And that was intentional. That was intentional because they didn't want a martyr. But his brother, Duvalier, continued to fight. For over a year, he continued to fight. But Duvalier, unlike Chatier was more of a more tolerable man. He told his people when we went into battle, let's not destroy our land. This is our land. Let's not destroy it. Duvalier and other side was like, listen, we're going to burn this to death. We're not going to be here. We're not going to leave nothing here standing to them. So Duvalier was a little bit more forceful, because he figured if we're not going to be here anymore, if this won't be our land, why are we going to sit up here and leave it in this pristine condition? So Duvalier was not above fighting aggressively for our land, and that's what he did. And he did so for another year, until, more of our Garifuna people continue to die. Our lands continue to deteriorate. And after a year of battle, Garifuna people started to surrender, but we were just, we were tired of fighting. So once we surrendered, they put us on Aliso. This is the island prison, which they put us on. They kept us there for over 18 months. I went to Beliso in August of 2019. It's still considered a barren land. It's difficult to get there. The water is rough, deep, and we tried to just imagine how our ancestors lived there. We had a few of the men that were with our group. They went fishing, tried to catch fish to see how difficult it would be to catch fish over there, and it was quite difficult. Even to this day, it's uninhabited. It's a private island. It's owned by a family. They've been trying to sell it for over 25 years. We stayed there for over 18 months. Initially, there was over 5,000 Garifuna people that surrendered. Depending on what you read, it's a little bit more, a little bit less. After 18 months, there was only half of us. This is a little bit of the prelude of what happened before we were exiled. Again, we spent 18 months on Beliso. According to the archives from the War Office, reports on June 22nd, 1796, there were 5,000 Caribs and Garinagu captured, what included men, women, and children. The General Hunter reported that about 4,633 Caribs, surrendered between July 4th through October 18th. The total of 5,080 Caribs or Garinagu surrendered and were shipped to Beliso. Again, depending on the number that you read, you'll hear 5,000, you'll hear 4,000 fluctuate. But the common denominator number is usually 5,000. 5,000 of us were shipped to Beliso, half of us came back. Okay, on February 20th, John Barrett sailed from Martinique bound to Saint Vincent. 5 days later, he arrived at Beliso, wherefrom the prisoners were taken to the port of Becua, and where the vessels were anchored ready for our repatriation. Isn't that so beautiful? Repatriation, doesn't that sound so lovely? They were getting ready to exile us. That was the last time we were going to be in our homeland. Yesterday was the day to remember in Garifuna history, February 20th. Now it's the last day that we that were exiled, that was the last day that our ancestors were on our land. So we were loaded on to 11 ships. And with that, we started our journey from our prison island of Beliso to Roatan. Why Roatan? Roatan back then was a British colony. Back then, during that time, you had British Honduras, you had Spanish Honduras. And although Roatan is off the coast of Honduras, it was in the area where it was considered British territory. So, according to archival records, the reason that the British thought that Roatan would be a good place for Garifuna people to be relocated to, because it seriously resembled our homeland of Saint Vincent. To this day, I went to Saint Vincent and I went to Roatan. And when there's certain places when you look down, you're like, oh my God, I feel like I'm back in Saint Vincent. So they thought by putting us in a place that was similar to our homeland that we would want to go back to our homeland. But, that wasn't true. You always have to feel for home. And Garifuna people, throughout oral history, we never stopped trying to go back home. There's different stories of how Garifuna people migrated to Nicaragua. One of the stories, one of the oldest oral traditions, stories that was told, is that the first people who migrated, the first load of Garifuna people who migrated to Nicaragua, got there by accident. They were trying to go back to their homeland, and their ships didn't make it, and they made it to Nicaragua. So you have the first settlements, according to our oldest oral history, that landed in Nicaragua. We arrived to Roatan, Honduras on April 12, 1797. We celebrate that today throughout the Garifuna diaspora as our arrival day to Central America. We celebrate it because we survived, despite everything that they did to us. Mind you, the stories that was told to me by my grandmother, my elders in my village that I grew up with, They always say, there's a reason. Garifuna people won't take food from anyone. They're not trusting of people. Because the food that they provided us, the rations, mind you, we were charged with treason. The sentence is death. But our Garifuna people were smart. What they noticed when they saw rodents going inside our feed, they were dropping dead. They have put arsenic in our food. They were trying to kill us. Their intention was not for us to make it to Roatan. Their intention was for us to die en route. Some of us did. As you'll see, the number will dwindle further as we disembark. Again, Garifuna arrived in Roatan, Honduras on April 12, 1797, after being exiled from their homeland, New Remain. In 1804, group led by Marcos Hodges Diaz arrived to Livingston, what we call in our language La Buga, which means Mount La Buga. The permanent settlement happened on May 15, 1806, but today we celebrate November 26th as our settlement day in La Buga, because we were forced to change that date because it coincided with a church holiday. And so the government there, forced us to change our original settlement date to what it is now, the 26th. I'm gonna get back to the book in a little bit. So the next major exodus from Honduras, because we couldn't stay in Honduras. There was too many things happening in Honduras. If you look at the dates and everything at this time, there was battles for basically who was going to control that region, of Spanish Honduras. They were not even Honduras, they weren't Guatemala yet, they were not even countries yet, they were still, trying to form at that time. So during that time, there was a lot of wars and issues. And in 1832, Alejo Bene led a group of Garinagu people who fled Honduras because of all of the violence and all of the political wars that were happening. And pretty much, a lot of the time, they blamed us for the nonsense that happened. And one of the things when we arrived to Roatan, again, that was kind of a barren land again. After staying there, we requested to get to the mainland of Honduras, and the government then agreed. They allowed us to, okay, you guys can come, because we had nothing. So they agreed for us to go to Honduras with one condition. You all have to get baptized. So in order for us to get formal help and get to the mainland, you'll see Garifuna people from Central America often having Spanish last names. My last name is Noralez. You have the Martinez's, you have, all of these different names. So basically, we were forced to take last names that we were not used to, because Garifuna people, as indigenous people, most indigenous people don't have last names. You could kind of relate to maybe, I always have this conversation with African Americans. They're like, well, Chaka Zulu has a last name. I said, no, Chaka was his name. But his name Zulu was referring to the territory, was the people. So that's not his last name. Then I talked to my Catholic people, and it's like, what was Jesus Christ's last name? Christ! And I'm like, if you read the Bible, it's basically Christ is his title, Jesus is his name. But does Jesus Christ have a last name? Does anybody know? Not that you know of, right? So this is pretty much common. Even I'm speaking to my friends from India, they tell us that often, again, they don't have last names, but they get their last name by the territory that they're in. Depending on what area they'll be like whatever their name in that territory is their last name. So you'll find that common. So Garifuna people did not have last names, but we were forced to get last names when we wanted to get to the mainland, and they christened us with random Christian Catholic names. The majority of the time when you meet a Garifuna person from Central America, you know they're Garifuna by their last name. But also, prior to us leaving, they were trying to evangelize us in Saint Vincent too, so you did have a few Garifuna people that were baptized there. But if you look at the record, you'll see the same person getting baptized as an Anglican, as a Catholic, because back then when you got baptized, what did you get? Gifts, trinkets. So you had some Garifuna people that got baptized multiple times, and it's recorded. So you'll see some Garifuna people who arrived with French last names because they were baptized by a French person, and they also have an English last name because they were double baptized by a French and an English person while they were in Saint Vincent. Another major massacre that happened was in 1937 in San Juan Tela. It's called the San Juan Tela Massacre, which led to the Garifuna fleeing. Remember I talked about Nicaragua, which led to them again fleeing to Nicaragua, and also led to what is now known as Hopkins Police. So the massacre took place at 9 a.m. on March 12, 1937, in front of the Garifuna Catholic Church that was there in San Juan. So what happened? According to the first account, and according to our oral history, what happened? And what happened in Honduras, especially what happened in Honduras in the massacre. Garifuna people were scared. Those people in Honduras who survived, they fled. And there was a bounty on Garifuna people's heads because we were accused again, because again what happened in Guatemala happened in Honduras. And according to first-hand accounts, there was an attempted coup in Honduras. And some Garifuna people who worked with the Banana Fruit Company, who came to the United States via the port of Louisiana, they were contacted by U.S. officials to help support this coup in Honduras. So word got back to the government in Honduras, and Pacific Garifuna people in different territories were accused of plotting a coup against the government of Honduras. So this is where that massacre happened. That's why the massacre, they accused several Garifuna people, including women and children, of plotting with the United States for this coup in Honduras. They forced the Garifuna people that were accused to dig their own hole. They were sentenced to a firing squad right in front of the community church. And there they dropped men, women, and children. Massacre right there. And again, they had a bounty on several Garifuna people. And from Honduras, a lot of them fled the police because they thought they would be safe in the British territory, and also in Guatemala. The first settlements of Garinagu people that were in Guatemala fled Guatemala. By the time when we first got to Guatemala in 1804, we had several families there. In between that time, recorded by the Hall of Records in Guatemala, there was only 6 families left during all of this turmoil. They migrated to Belize, and what happened when the dust settled is the government of Guatemala located a lot of those families that moved to Belize and invited them to come back to Livingston. This is your home. They wanted them back to Livingston. And they not only invited the people who left Livingston, the Garifuna people who left Livingston, they also invited any other Garifuna people who wanted to settle in Livingston. All of that territory was given to the Garifuna people who came back and settled in Livingston by the government of Guatemala. We still fight for our indigenous land rights because the same thing that occurred in Saint Vincent is the same excuse that they have for us in Honduras and Belize. That if you look like me, you must be African, so that way you can't be indigenous to Central America, you can't be indigenous here, you don't have any indigenous rights. Although Garifuna people were given land in Honduras. Mind you, when they kicked us out from there, we were given Roatan. What did they do in Roatan? They did the same thing they did in Saint Vincent. They sold the land from underneath us and gave it back to the Europeans. So we've been fighting that battle for years. In Belize, when we fled from Honduras, we asked the government of Belize for safety. They initially granted us the southern part of Belize, which wasn't developed yet. These are pretty much the Central American communities that we have. And we also have reports of Garifuna communities in the Cayman Islands, as well as in Panama. During the Panama building of the Panama Canal, a lot of Garifuna people, of course, took advantage of the economical situation and went over there. The thing about Garifuna people, because they were free people, they were able to travel anywhere to work. They were able to build their wealth, homeland, and everything like that. But many of the African descent people there were indentured servants or slaves. They weren't allowed to have property or land or work freely. So the Garifuna native tongue is an Arawak and Moorpark language. We speak a Native American language. The mistake is because, you know, I am of darker hue, and the whole Garifuna people are shipwreck slaves. The number one thing is, like, you guys can speak an African dialect, but we don't. Research has been done, and they have not been able to find no more than 8 words that are linked to some sort of word in Africa. But majority of our language is an Arawak-based language. And it's spoken in Belize, the United States, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Honduras. Let me backtrack a little bit, because originally, one of the most popular places Garifuna people reside was in Louisiana. Because during that whole time when we were coming here with the United Fruit Company, a lot of Garifuna people settled over there in Louisiana, you know, during the whole United Fruit Company. But after, the Hurricane Katrina, a lot of those older families that were there relocated to Houston. This is a picture of the Kalina Garifuna men in Saint Vincent of today. That's their traditional wear. You know, I met this man over here. He's the current chief of the Garifuna people in Saint Vincent. Very friendly guy. And these are the representation of Garifuna people from Central America. This is the chief, the current chief. We met him. We had the luxury of meeting him in 2019, prior to the whole COVID thing that's happened in August. So this is his traditional gear, and this is his dress gear. Here in the United States, New York has the largest population of Garifuna people outside of Central America.